Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into something seriously mind-bending. We are unpacking an absolutely fascinating piece of source material that looks at the deep, psychological unraveling of an institution known as the Cassian Reaches Advocates Guild. Now, this isn't just your standard story about a broken voting machine. No, it's a masterful, step-by-step exploration of how righteous people incrementally rationalize their way into becoming the exact villains they set out to destroy. I am so incredibly excited to guide you through this, because the way this narrative captures human ambition, fear, and administrative drift is just, well, it's unbelievable.
Right out of the gate, the text hits us with this central, completely wild paradox. Think about this for a second. What happens when a completely honest politician actually wins a rigged election and the riggers blackmail her anyway? It's a brilliant hook, right? Today, we're going to dissect a systemic failure that was driven entirely by human emotions and mental gymnastics. We're going to look at this whole event through the eyes of the people who actually built the trap, the people who fell into it, and the people who just sold it for parts.
Okay, let's set the scene by understanding the world these characters inhabit. The text introduces us to this suffocating culture inside the Hall of Petitions, and it's governed by a rule called the weight of the chair. Basically, this was an 11-generation-old custom where the speaker was chosen purely on deference. If you were old and you just managed to stick around, you were owed power. Imagine being a young, brilliant advocate and being expected to just sit down and wait your turn behind elders who fundamentally confused mere survival with actual wisdom. As you can guess, it was an absolute pressure cooker of generational resentment.
Part 1. The Impatient Outsider. Cyril Okonkwo Vance's Righteous Ascent.
Meet Cyril Okonkwo Vance. She's a 41-year-old advocate from a remote outer circuit called Braith. She has a massive caseload, the highest resolution rate, 0 disciplinary findings, and absolutely 0 patience for the establishment. To the elders, 41 means she's practically a toddler. But to the junior advocates, she is an absolute rock star. The hall demanded patience dressed up as wisdom, but Cyril's emotional reality was just, she was right earlier than everyone else. Her mentor, Patrick Soe, actually warned her that the guild actively punishes ambition, but from Cyril's perspective, she just felt this intense, burning frustration. Why on earth should she defer to incompetence just because it has gray hair? She had this incredible, uncompromising perspective, perfectly captured in this quote. I've never seen the point of being patient with people who are simply wrong for longer than I've been alive. You can see why that internal logic made her wildly popular with young circuit advocates who were desperate for a shakeup. But that exact same uncompromising nature made her utterly terrifying to a shadowy group that had been operating behind the scenes.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Cynical Architects, How Reform Curdles into Conspiracy.
To really understand this conspiracy, we have to look at a group called the Undercurrent. This was an invisible faction that actually started 22 years prior as a righteous movement to stop deferring to the old guard. The plan was to quietly position themselves in boring administrative roles and change the system from within. But over 2 decades, their noble mission slowly succumbed to administrative drift. They basically forgot they were supposed to be reformers and just became obsessed with maintaining their leverage. Listen to the cold, calculating logic of their founder, Halvor Ija. Halvor knows Cyril is going to win the election cleanly, by a massive margin. But his paranoia dictates. A speaker who knows she owes us nothing is a speaker we cannot survive. To him, an independent, untethered leader isn't a victory for reform. It's a literal existential threat to his shadow operation. And you can see how this logic trickles down to Halvor's operative, Dessa Real. We get to see this profound cognitive dissonance in her perspective. Internally, Dessa desperately needs to believe she's one of the good ones. She tells herself she's just running standard procurement. But look at her external actions. She purposefully steered a massive election contract to a vulnerable, desperate, and understaffed company named Quorum Tech. She weaponized their weakness to build a shadow ledger, all while convincing herself it was just strategic positioning for the greater good. Then comes election night, and it is a masterpiece of dramatic irony. The election system genuinely buckles under the weight of 80,000 honest users trying to log in all at once. From Cyril's perspective, she's just mildly frustrated, assuming it's normal clunky outer world infrastructure. Meanwhile, Baro Cattell, the sleep-deprived tech guy at Quorum Tech, is in a state of sheer unadulterated panic as his servers literally crash around him. But Halvor? Halvor is watching this collapse with cold, clinical satisfaction because the authentic failure of the system accidentally provided the Undercurrent with the absolute perfect cover story for what they were about to do. Section 3, The Perfect Forgery. Crafting a Lie from a Broken Truth. The undercurrent knew that actual hacking leaves forensic traces. So instead of hacking, they built a flawless, cryptographically convincing lie out of a broken truth. Let's walk through the mechanics of Halvor's so-called Quorum Protocol step by step, because it's wild. Step 1, the seat. They simply made sure Borrow's root access was never revoked. Step 2, the fork. At the exact mathematical moment Seral won, they copied the real ledger hashes into a private fork. Step 3, the rewrite. Inside that isolated fork, they falsified the data to look like a narrow, manipulated margin. Step 4, the backdate. They used the real server failure logs from that chaotic night to cover up the timestamp of their forgery. And finally, Step 5, the seal, encrypting it away. It was just 5 tiny administrative actions that manufactured a devastating blackmail weapon. And the absolute tragedy of it all is summed up in this one number, 19. Cyril actually won by a massive, completely clean 19-point margin. The people genuinely wanted her, but the forgery mathematically reduced it to a manufactured 2-point margin, designed purely to make her feel illegitimate. The crime wasn't rigging an election. The crime was forging a confession to a rigging that never even happened. But here's where things go off the rails. What happens when secret leverage falls into the hands of a mid-level clerk? A system built on leverage inevitably turns that leverage into a currency. Halvor thought he had absolute control, but he was about to learn the hard way that you simply cannot contain corruption. Section 4. The Rogue Broker, Ines Fadrell and the Whisper Market. Enter Ines Fadrell. She was a procurement clerk operating in the underground Whisper Market under the alias Tallyman. Ines somehow managed to intercept a copy of the forged shard. Her internal logic is perfectly, chillingly detached. Don't ask who benefits. Just make certain it never traces back to you. She casually turns around and sells the blackmail material to an anonymous buyer who just wants to test Seral. This perfectly contrasts her emotionless, petty greed against Halvor's grand ideological paranoia. In doing so, Ines turns Halvor's carefully sealed surgical leverage into a chaotic opening move for someone else entirely. Section 5. The Compromised Speaker. The slippery slope of administrative drift. So, shortly after taking office, Cyril receives this anonymous, forged shard. Imagine the crushing reality setting in. Her own institution is operating a shadow cabal against her, and she has no way to prove her own true victory. Let's trace her tragic descent as that exhaustion really takes hold. In year 1, she confronts Halvor and learns the awful truth. By year 3, under constant threat of the forgery being released, she quietly kills a vital election audit reform bill, a bill that, ironically, would have stopped this from ever happening again. By year 4, she's actively bearing disciplinary complaints to protect the conspirators. And by year 7, she doesn't even wait to be threatened anymore. She proactively anticipates the undercurrent's needs. The righteous outsider has incrementally transformed into a load-bearing pillar of the exact corruption she once hated. How does she sleep at night? Well, she translates her compromise into this internal monologue. Refusing would cost the guild more than complying. She repeated this exact sentence to herself, over and over, year after year, until it stopped feeling like a flimsy justification and just became a cold, hard fact. In her mind, she had to protect the institution, even if it meant protecting its rot. The cyclical tragedy of this is just devastating. At 41, Sorel refused to wait behind old men who confused longevity with judgment. Yet at 52, as her term is finally ending, another brilliant, impatient outsider named Priya Wen Aster is poised to win the election cleanly. And what does Sorel do? She calmly authorizes the undercurrent to forge a ledger and blackmail Priya, doing exactly what the old guard did to her. Listen to Sorel's chilling logic regarding her successor. I'd rather she owe us something before she finds out the hard way what the chair actually costs. It's breathtaking, isn't it? Sorel has fully adopted the cynical, paranoid logic of Halvor, her former enemy. She hasn't become a monster out of some grand malice. She's become the monster simply out of exhausted institutional habit. She genuinely thinks she is doing Priya a favor by initiating her into the darkness early. Which leaves us with this massive, provocative thought to end on. Does reforming a corrupt system inevitably require becoming the very monster you set out to destroy? The Quorum Protocol shows us that the true hidden cost of power isn't usually some dramatic explosion of evil. It's the tragic, quiet nature of administrative drift. It's the thousands of tiny compromises you make, constantly telling yourself you are the good guy, until one day you wake up and you're the one holding the blackmail. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this completely changes how you look at the mechanics of power.